The silence of the 5 acres was a weight Marcus carried on his shoulders. It was a familiar burden, one he'd chosen when he'd cashed out his savings for this forgotten patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere. Here the ghosts had room to breathe, or so he'd thought. But the ghost of Sergeant Leo Martinez, with his wide grin and the hole where his life used to be, followed him from the cramped city apartment to this sprawling, weed-choked purgatory. At 45, Marcus felt ancient. His body, once a finely tuned instrument of the Special Forces, was a roadmap of aches and old injuries. His mind was worse, a landscape of fractured memories, all leading back to the same sun-scorched alley, the same glint of a sniper's scope, the same final, surprised look on Leo's face. He was running from that memory, and he'd run right into a new kind of prison. His only companion was Baron, a German shepherd whose sable coat was the color of desert shadows, and whose eyes held a loyalty Marcus felt he no longer deserved. For 3 nights, Baron had broken the silence. It wasn't a bark of alarm or the playful yip of a chase. It was a howl, a deep, mournful, and unending lament directed at the rusted shell of an old Airstream trailer sitting at the far edge of the property. It was a skeletal thing, its aluminum skin pockmarked and dull, its windows blown out like vacant eyes. To Marcus, it was just another piece of junk to be hauled away. But to Baron, it was an obsession. The dog would sit, nose pointed at the trailer's peeling door, and keen as the moon arced across the sky. On the 4th night, Marcus couldn't take it anymore. The sound was a drill boring into the fragile piece he was trying to build. He grabbed a heavy flashlight and a crowbar, his knuckles white. "Fine," he growled, the words rusty in his throat. "You want to see what's in the damn thing? We'll see." He stomped through the overgrown grass, Baron trotting silently at his heels, the howling replaced by a low, expectant whine. The dog wasn't just making noise. He was issuing a summons. The air around the trailer was stale, thick with the smell of rust and decay. Marcus jammed the crowbar into the seam of the door, the metal groaning in protest. He put his shoulder into it, the muscles of his back coiling with a familiar tension. A decade of kicking indoors had taught him how to read the language of resistance, of wood and metal giving way. With a final, percussive shriek, the lock broke and the door swung inward into darkness. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a disaster. Mold climbed the walls in dark, spidery patterns. A small table and a single chair were overturned, and the floor was littered with debris. It was the tomb of a forgotten life. Baron, however, ignored the mess. He pushed past Marcus, his nails clicking on the grimy linoleum, and went straight to a small, built-in bench at the back. He began to paw at the wooden base, whining insistently, looking back at Marcus with an unnerving intelligence. Annoyance warred with curiosity in Marcus's chest. He knelt, running his hand along the dusty wood where Baron was scratching. His fingers, trained to find the unnatural, the hidden, found it. A slight give, a seam that didn't belong. He wedged the tip of the crowbar into the hairline crack and pried. The false front of the bench popped open, revealing a dark cavity. Inside sat a single object, a small steel footlocker, the kind soldiers used to secure their valuables. It was locked. Baron sat back on his haunches, his tail giving a single, satisfied thump against the floor. Carrying the footlocker back to his small, sparsely furnished cabin felt like a mission. The weight was substantial, the contents shifting with a heavy, muffled clatter. Marcus placed it on his workbench, the bare bulb overhead illuminating the military-style stenciling on the lid. SGT. R. Henderson, another soldier. He felt a strange kinship with the unseen Henderson. He studied the lock, a simple but sturdy combination dial. His fingers, remembering old training, traced the cool metal. He closed his eyes, listening, feeling. It was a skill he hadn't used in years, a relic of a life he was trying to forget. With a gentle touch, he spun the dial, listening for the faint, almost imperceptible click of the tumblers falling into place. He felt the first one catch, then the second. He held his breath, turning the dial with microscopic precision. The third tumbler dropped. A quiet, final thunk. He lifted the latch, and the lid opened with a soft hiss of compressed air. The scent of old paper and gun oil filled the cabin. Inside, nestled in yellowed foam padding, lay a vintage Colt 1911 pistol, its blued steel immaculate, and a thick, leather-bound journal. He set the weapon aside, his hand drawn to the book. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, disciplined. "My name is Robert Henderson," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I failed. It means he found me. Don't trust the land sale. Don't trust Thorn." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thorn. As in, Thorn Development, the corporate behemoth that had been sending him lowball offers for his land since the day he'd bought it. Marcus spent the next 2 days devouring Henderson's journal. The story that unfolded was one of quiet integrity and corporate greed. Sergeant Henderson, a combat engineer, had come home from his own war to this same piece of land, seeking the same peace Marcus now craved. He'd discovered something valuable here. Not gold, but a massive, unrecorded aquifer, a pure water source in a state increasingly starved for it. He'd planned to register it, to protect it for the community. But Thorn Development, led by its ruthless CEO, Arthur Thorn, had found out. They wanted the water rights, and they'd tried to force Henderson out. The journal detailed a campaign of escalating harassment. Cut fences, poisoned wells, veiled threats. Henderson, like Marcus, was a fighter. He documented everything, collecting soil samples, recording conversations, building a case. The last entry was chilling. "Thorn is coming himself tomorrow. He says he wants to make a final offer. I don't think it's about the money anymore. I've made him look weak. He can't have that. My evidence is hidden. The key is the promise I made to my wife." The entry ended there. Marcus knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his bones, that Henderson hadn't just moved away. The man had made a stand, and he had lost. The fight wasn't over a piece of dirt. It was over a legacy. Marcus looked around his cabin, at the half-sanded planks for a new porch, the plans for a garden. For the first time in years, he wasn't just occupying a space, he was building a home. He owed it to Henderson to see this through. The next morning, he drove into the small town of Harmony Creek for supplies. At the hardware store, the owner, a friendly man named George with flour-dusted hands from the bakery next door, greeted him. "Starting to look like something out at the old Henderson place," George said, ringing up Marcus's lumber and nails. "Good to see it getting some life again." Robert was a good man, kept to himself but solid. Marcus felt a pang of connection. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough. He used to talk about protecting this valley. Said there were vultures circling." George's eyes were shrewd. "Looks like they're still circling. A fancy fella in a suit was in here last week, asking about you. Name was Thorn." A week later, a cloud of dust announced the arrival of a sleek, black sedan. It rolled to a stop near Marcus's cabin, and a man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair and the predatory stillness of a hawk. It was Arthur Thorn. Baron, standing beside Marcus on the new porch, let out a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. Marcus placed a hand on the dog's back. "It's okay, boy." Thorn's smile didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. "Marcus Thorn. I'm the man who's been trying to buy this charmingly rustic property." He gestured dismissively at the land. "I'll be blunt. I'm prepared to offer you 5 times what you paid for it. A check could be in your hands by tomorrow." Marcus felt the words from Henderson's journal echo in his mind. He looked past Thorn, at the hills shimmering in the heat. This was Henderson's land. Now it was his. "It's not for sale," he said, his voice level. Thorn's smile tightened. "Mr. Thorn, you're a man who understands assets and liabilities. This land is an asset to me. To you, it's a liability. A broken-down veteran on a useless plot of land. It's a sad story. Let me give it a happy ending." The condescension was a lit fuse. "The answer is no," Marcus said, his voice hardening. Thorn stared at him for a long moment, his mask of civility slipping. "Everything has a price," he said, his tone dropping. "And everyone has a breaking point. You should consider that before you make a powerful enemy over a pile of rocks and weeds." He turned and got back into his car, leaving Marcus standing in a haze of dust and unspoken threats. Baron's growl deepened, a promise of violence held just in check. The war had come home. The threat wasn't idle. 2 nights later, Marcus was woken by Baron's frantic barking. He grabbed the heavy Colt 1911 from the nightstand, Henderson's gun, and moved silently to the window. 2 shadowy figures were near his newly installed well pump, a crowbar in their hands. They weren't trying to be quiet. This was intimidation. Marcus chambered around, the sound echoing loud in the small cabin. He flicked on the powerful outdoor floodlights he'd installed. The 2 men, caught in the brilliant glare, froze like deer. They were big, brutish, clearly hired muscle. "You're on private property," Marcus's voice boomed through the night air, amplified by years of command. "I'd advise you to leave the way you came," one of them smirked, hefting his crowbar. "Or what, old man? You gonna shoot us?" Marcus raised the pistol, the beam of his weapon-mounted light pinning the man's face. "I'm a patient man," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "But my dog isn't on cue." Baron let out a ferocious snarl, lunging against the porch railing, his teeth bared. The men exchanged a nervous look. This wasn't the easy scare job they'd been paid for. They dropped the crowbar and backed away, hands raised, before scrambling into a waiting truck and peeling out. Marcus watched them go, his heart hammering. This wasn't about water anymore. Thorn had made it personal. He went back inside, his mind racing. He had to find the rest of Henderson's evidence. He reread the last journal entry. "The key is the promise I made to my wife." He searched the journal for any mention of Henderson's wife, finding only one. A pressed wildflower next to a passage about their anniversary. "I promised her a garden of desert roses, right by the trailer, where she loved to watch the sunset." Marcus's blood ran cold. He grabbed his flashlight and a shovel and ran back to the airstream, Baron at his side. He found the spot easily, a small, cleared patch of earth near the trailer's rear window, exactly where the sunset would be most visible. He began to dig. The ground was hard, packed clay. For an hour, he dug under the faint starlight, sweat stinging his eyes. Then the shovel struck something with a dull, metallic thud. He dropped to his knees, clearing the dirt with his bare hands until he uncovered a small, welded ammo can. It was heavy. He carried it back to the cabin, his hands trembling slightly. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of documents and a single, encrypted flash drive. The documents were geological surveys, water sample analyses, and notarized affidavits from other landowners Thorn had bullied. But it was the flash drive that held the true secret. Marcus, whose specialization in the military had been signals intelligence and cryptography, plugged it into his laptop. The encryption was military-grade, but it was a pattern he recognized. It was an older algorithm, one his own unit had used. It took him 4 hours, his mind falling back into old, familiar grooves, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Finally, the firewall broke. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled Project Jericho. He clicked it open. Inside were shipping manifests, internal memos, and a chain of emails. They detailed a cost-saving measure by a subsidiary of Thorn Development that manufactured armored plating for military vehicles. They had knowingly substituted a cheaper, substandard steel composite on a specific batch of Humvees. The date on the final shipping manifest made Marcus's vision swim. It was the batch assigned to his unit. He pulled up another file, an after-action report. It was the official account of Leo's death. Vehicle compromised by enemy sniper using high-caliber, armor-piercing rounds. It wasn't an armor-piercing round. It was standard ammunition that should have been stopped. Thorn's greed, his decision to shave a few dollars off a manufacturing contract, had punched a hole through the steel and killed his best friend. The grief and rage Marcus had been suppressing for years erupted in a single silent scream. This wasn't Henderson's fight anymore. It was his. He knew he couldn't go to the authorities. Thorn would bury the evidence, bury him. He was alone, but he wasn't helpless. He looked around the cabin, at the tools on his workbench, at the land he now knew every inch of. He looked at Baron, who sat watching him, his head cocked as if he understood everything. Marcus wasn't a soldier anymore, but the skills were still there, dormant but not gone. He was going to turn this sanctuary into a fortress. For the next 24 hours, he worked with a feverish, focused energy he hadn't felt since his days in the service. This wasn't about violence. It was about justice. It was about capture and confession. He re-rigged the electrical system for the floodlights to a hidden tripwire. He modified a heavy-duty winch from his truck, placing it inside the old airstream and running the cable to a reinforced ankle snare hidden on the path leading to the trailer. Inside the trailer itself, he set up a series of small, hidden cameras, all feeding back to his laptop. He disabled Thorne's car remotely using a device he'd built years ago. The final piece was Henderson's pistol, loaded not with lethal rounds, but with less lethal rubber bullets. He was setting a trap, and he knew Thorne, arrogant and accustomed to winning, would walk right into it. He sent an anonymous email to Thorne from a burner account. "I have Henderson's evidence. And more. Come alone to the property tonight if you want it back. Or the world gets it tomorrow." He knew the man's ego wouldn't allow anyone else to handle this. Thorne would come himself to extinguish the threat for good. As dusk settled, a profound calm fell over Marcus. He sat on his porch, Henderson's journal in his lap, Baron resting his head on his knee. The trap was set. Now he just had to wait. Right on schedule, the headlights of Thorne's sedan cut through the twilight. The car rolled to a stop, and Thorne got out, this time dressed in dark, practical clothing. He carried a briefcase. Marcus watched from the shadows of his cabin as Thorne approached, his stride confident. He walked straight past the cabin, his eyes fixed on the airstream, the obvious place for a meeting. Just as he passed the overgrown rosebush, his foot caught the tripwire. Instantly, the entire property was bathed in blinding light. Simultaneously, the winch inside the trailer activated with a high-pitched whine. The steel cable snapped taut around Thorne's ankle, yanking him off his feet and hoisting him upside down, dangling 5 feet off the ground. He swore, dropping the briefcase, which sprang open to reveal not papers, but a suppressed pistol. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, Henderson's Colt held steady in a two-handed grip. "It's over, Thorne," struggling like a snared animal, sneered at him. "You think this stops anything?" He managed to twist his body, reaching for a backup weapon strapped to his other ankle. He was faster than Marcus anticipated. He drew a small revolver and fired. The shot went wide, but the muzzle flash was blinding. Marcus felt a searing pain in his left shoulder as a second shot grazed him, staggering him backward. He lost his grip on the Colt. Thorne was trying to cut himself free. Just as Thorne's hand closed on the knife, a black and tan blur erupted from the porch. Baron, silent until this moment, launched himself through the air. He hit Thorne with the force of a freight train, his jaws clamping down not on flesh, but on the arm holding the revolver. The gun clattered to the ground. Baron didn't let go, his deep growl a promise of death, holding the man immobile. Marcus, clutching his bleeding shoulder, retrieved his weapon and walked slowly toward the dangling, defeated CEO, whose face was a mask of shock and terror. "I know about Project Jericho," Marcus said, his voice raw. "I know about Leo Martinez." Thorne's eyes widened in dawning horror. It wasn't about water. It was never about water. The evidence from the flash drive, combined with a full confession from a terrified Arthur Thorne recorded on the hidden cameras, was ironclad. The subsequent investigation and trial were front-page news, exposing a web of corruption that ran deeper than anyone imagined. Thorne development crumbled. Justice, slow and hard-earned, had finally been served. Marcus's wound was minor, and as it healed, so did something deeper inside him. The ghosts didn't vanish, but they grew quiet, their restless energy replaced by a sense of peace. He used the substantial settlement he received to establish the Leo Martinez Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting the families of soldiers who had fallen not just in combat, but to the quiet betrayals of corporate greed and faulty equipment. The derelict property became his life's work. He restored the airstream, polishing its aluminum skin until it shone like a silver promise in the sun. He planted a garden of desert roses where he had found the ammo can. It became a place of remembrance, a sanctuary. He never sold the land or the water rights. Instead, he worked with the community to place them in a public trust, ensuring Henderson's legacy, and his own, would be to protect the valley, not exploit it. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, he would sit on his porch, Barron's head on his lap, and look out over the land that had saved him. He had come here to run from his past, but a loyal dog and a rusted trailer had forced him to confront it. In doing so, he had not only found justice for his friend, but he had also, against all odds, rebuilt himself. The silence was no longer a weight, but a comfort, filled with the promise of a future he had earned.